morning, everybody, and welcome to Lecture 2 of English 100B. I wanted to start out with some reminders, and then we'll see if anybody in the studio has questions. For starters, your green sheet contract actually runs pages 1 through 4 in your laying out the textbook. Please take both pages out, staple them, sign them, date them, and return them to the site indicated in your course syllabus. Also, I'm hoping that you have started, or certainly by today, we'll start a grammar review cassette tape for yourself. Put all the key rules and definitions that we started to discuss the other day on it, and then just listen to it at least one time a day, and those rules will go down really easily. I also want you to supplement anything we do in the way of grammar that you'd love to have more practice on by going to the website, which is grammar.deanzacollege.org, and that will give you extra practice with exercises and self-correct answers for anything we happen to be talking about. Now, today, here are the things that I'm hoping we get through, but I really have a lot of things on this list, and any that we don't finish or cover today, we certainly will cover on the next lecture. So we're going to start with page 15 in setting up the palette. Hopefully we'll get through page 22. And we're going to review the terminology, the definitions, and the rules that we kind of glided by in the overview in our last lecture. So we'll be talking again about the definition of a clause and the definition of a simple sentence. And we had gone through all 6 variations of the simple sentence, but we'll go through them again today with different examples. You'll remember that a simple sentence can have just one subject, just one verb. It can also be a command. It can have multiple subjects, multiple verbs, multiple subjects, just one verb, or the other variation, only one subject and multiple verbs. And it can be inverted, meaning that the verb is going to come before the subject. Sometimes a simple sentence is written as a question. We'll look at examples of all of those. And then in the palette book on pages 23 to 27, we'll talk about how do you punctuate items in a series. What if the series is objects? What if it's subjects? What if it's verbs or verb phrases? And we'll go through a lot of examples to illustrate those points. We'll then go to the palette book on pages 29 to 34, and we'll talk about variations of the simple sentence, which include that inverted clause I was mentioning a moment ago where the verb comes before the subject, which is sometimes also the case for the question. And to that end, again, we will be analyzing examples that come up in the Setting Up the Palette book. I'm going to give you, in the way of written assignments, 2 for sure, possibly a third. The first one, in setting up the palette, pages 35 and 36, really doesn't ask you to write anything. It sets up the writing exercise that I want you to do in advance of our next lecture, which will be in the other book, laying out the text, and that will be pages 65 to 69. And we'll go over your answers to that assignment when we have our next lecture. Then we're going to do a practice exercise on locating subjects and verbs in the questions, and then just the verbs in simple sentences that appear in exercise 2 in setting up the palette on pages 37 to 46. I'm going to go through with you the instructions for how to take a listening test on page 37 in laying out the text, and I'm really motivated to try and give you listening test 1 today. I think I might do that. And then those of us in studio will correct the tests right on the spot, but those of you at home will submit the score for listening test number 1 via email and simply refer to the course syllabus for the due date, or in many cases a listserv memo coming from your instructor. Now, before we get started, does anybody have any leftover questions that I need to address before we go forward? Anybody? Very happy just as you are? Scott?
I just noticed that some simple sentences aren't so simple.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
The title of the sentence has nothing to do with what the content can give you. Yes, I'm sure you're going to come across some of those today. Anybody else with a question? And by the way, you'll remember that we talked about a 4-paragraph diagnostic paper, and you will have a listserv memo sent to you with added directions, or I'll go over it later in the day if that's your pleasure, maybe in the second hour. Let's go to page 15, and we're redoing everything we talked about the other day, for real this time, in setting up the palette. And I'm reminding you that these 2 definitions you should now have memorized solid. You should know that a clause is a group of words that contains a complete subject and a complete verb, and it will apply to any type of clause. Right now we're working with the main clause, but it will apply to any type of clause. You should also know that all sentences are determined by the number and type of clauses they contain. Now, we said the other day that the subject is what the sentence is about. You have an example here, it's in your book. And again, don't answer for each other. We'll go through it through as many people as we need to get a correct answer. Look at this first one. Before stepping into the present, we must turn back the pages leading into the past. Farah, what do you see that looks like a subject, if anything?
We.
We. All of you get a line under we. And how about the verb?
Must turn back.
Must turn back. I'm going to take it just as you said it. Let me ask you another question. What kind of a clause is this? Louder, Farah.
Main clause.
It's a main clause. Label it M-1. And what kind of a sentence is it?
Simple sentence.
It's a simple sentence. Well, I agree with you definitely on must and turn, but you remember that verb check that we did the other day? And it went something like this. And on the plural side, we're going to go back to this verb check more than once today, but just for the moment. You remember that if it's a verb, it should fit in one of these slots. And I want to try the word back. I back, you back, he back, we back, they back. Doesn't seem like a verb. That's step one. Get out your dictionary, Farah, for me. Do you have one there? Dictionary? Look up the word back, and at the moment, I don't care what it means. I want to know if it can be a verb, and that's a little bit tricky. I realize that as I'm asking you the question. Back. In general, what part of speech is the word back going to be? Do you see it? Scott, do you see it?
Well, it can be a noun, but it's an adverb in this other listing.
Okay.
And it's also listed as an adjective and a verb.
Yes, that's what I was waiting for. It can be a noun. You said it can be an adjective. You said it can be an adverb.
Right.
Yes, it can be a verb, and I was thinking about that as soon as I asked Farah to look it up, if I said, back up your car. But here, it's definitely turned back. It's modifying the verb. We're going to call it a verb modifier or an adverb. So your verb is just must turn and not back. And we are going to step back historically into the past before we go any further and take a look at the city of Delft as it looks today. This is how it looked in April of 2002. It's a very beautiful city. In some ways, it looks very different, but in some ways, it looks just like it looks now. Do you see it on your screen?
No.
Can we have a view of Delft as it looks today, please, on the screen? I want to refer to it as a city, but I guess really it's more of a town. That church spire that you see in the background, that was there when Vermeer was there. In fact, he's buried in one of those churches. It was just a little tiny town. It's gotten just a little bit bigger today. Okay, now the verb, and we are now back in the 17th century, and we're going to stay in the 17th century on this next example here. The verb makes a statement about the subject. Remember, we said yesterday it could be an action or it could be a state of being. Look at this example. We can begin by looking at Vermeer's town of Delft and the people living there in the 1650s. Pippa, do you see a subject?
We.
How about a verb?
Can begin.
So one line under we and two under can begin. Pippa, what kind of a clause is this?
Main.
So we'll label it M-1. And what kind of a sentence is it?
Simple.
Simple. And now let's take another look at the painting that Johannes Vermeer did of Delft in 1660. You see how it looks today. And now we're going to take a look at how it looked in the past, because then we're going to stay in the past. We're going to think about 1700s for just a while. So here is the painting, the very beautiful painting that Vermeer did in 1660. It's now in the Moritz House in The Hague. It's the largest painting that he ever did. He absolutely captured the beauty of this little village town that's situated on a number of canals. So we're now back in the 1600s together with Vermeer and concentrating on the things he might have been hearing or experiencing. Highlight this on page 17 in the palette book, if you would. Definition of the simple sentence. The simple sentence contains one main or independent clause that stands alone. Remember that main and independent mean exactly the same thing. So if you tell me that a simple sentence has one main clause that stands alone, or that a simple sentence has one independent clause that stands alone, you said the same thing. We have this example in the book. Carriage wheels and wheelbarrows are heard clattering and rumbling over uneven stones and brick-paved streets. Jeff, where's your next subject? Nothing? Jessica, where's that subject?
I'm not sure.
Give it a shot.
Carriage wheels?
Carriage wheels is one, and I'm only going to take the wheels part because I don't care about the modifying adjective. I think there's another subject in this sentence. Do you see it? Wheelbarrows. Wheelbarrows. Get a line under each of those. That's right. And Kim, where are the verbs that go with those two subjects?
Are heard.
Are heard. 2 lines under that. I wonder, Kim, what kind of a clause this is.
A main?
It's a main clause. I wonder what kind of a sentence it is.
Simple.
Right. And Scott, did she pick up the whole verb?
Is clattering part of the verb?
Clattering would be part of the verb, and I think you have even another part of the verb.
Rumbling.
Rumbling. And this would be a good time to have a question, and the question would go something like this. How come sometimes you look at a clause and the verb is 1 word long, but sometimes it's 2 words long, sometimes it's 3? How can that be? And the answer, very simplistic until we get part of the review that addresses that particular concept, is that if you have half verbs, clattering and rumbling for starters are half verbs, and in this sentence, heard is another one, and you add a helping verb to it, you stretch out the number of words it takes to make the verb. Yeah, go ahead with that question, Jerry.
Do you, in this situation, would you add are heard clattering as one verb, or would you break it down into two
Are
different?
heard clattering / rumbling. If you asked me to write down the verbs in this sentence, that's what I would have put. I would have put are heard clattering. I wouldn't get the and in there. That's just a connecting word. / rumbling. That's all the verb that goes with that clause. Now, highlight, remember the usual word order or syntax is subject, verb, object. As you can see, your subject words come first, and then you have a verb. Actually, this sentence would go like this. You have 2 subjects, and you really just have 1 verb with sort of 2 parts. Maybe if you want to see it are heard clattering, are heard rumbling, well, then you could tell me that it would be 2. But it's definitely a main clause, and it's definitely a simple sentence. At this point, take a look at the kind of roadways that exist in Delft today, and immediately you'll understand why people don't drive cars for the most part. This is what you see. And there are bicycle riders all over the town of Delft, mostly bicycle riders who move as fast as cars. And these roads, even when you walk on them, are very uneven. They go uphill a little way, downhill a little way. You don't ever want to walk on them with a pair of high heels. That would be just torture beyond compare. They're much as they were in Vermeer's time. Not much has changed. Now this tells us that the simple sentence, Ben, can have only 1 word. Sometimes it does. Now that I'm calling that a simple sentence, stop. And I'm asking you, where's the verb? Stop. Okay. Now where's the subject?
It's implied you.
Good, exactly. Write the word in next to your subject. This would be a main clause. It would be a simple sentence. Notice it also answers to the definition of a clause. It has a complete subject and it has a complete verb, even though, as is often the case in commands, the subject is implied. A command, of course, could be longer than that. Listen to the weavers of silks and satins create rhythmic sounds at their clicking and clacking looms. Yvonne, where is, I don't see a subject, where's the verb?
Listen.
And then I think you still just have listen. I agree with you. Where is the subject?
Implied you.
What kind of a clause are we looking at?
Main clause.
And what kind of a sentence is it?
Simple sentence.
Now, being a weaver myself, I think this would be a fantastic city or town fantastic time period to be living in because weavers were prominent artists in Holland at that time. And they still make very beautiful fabrics. On page 18 in your book, I want you to highlight this note that we mentioned the other day. Do remember, people, that in command form, the subject can be a stated or an understood you. Generally speaking, it's an understood you, but as important, you need to remember that when it is understood, you can't imply I, he, she, it, we, or they. The only word you can imply is you. We're doing much better on this today. I think the overview we did the other day was a good thing to do. This says the simple sentence can have just one subject and just one verb. That's going to be a variation. You remember we have a total of 6. So let's look at this one on page 18. Unlike the noisy weavers at their looms, painters using canvas boards or porcelain tiles to paint on make almost no sound at all. Amy, do you see a subject in that?
Weavers.
Weavers? No, actually it's not at all. And I want to get a check above that. I want to come back and talk about it in a minute. Elbelin, do you see a subject?
Painters.
It's going to be painters. If painters is the subject, where's your verb?
Paint. To paint.
To paint? I'm going to put a check above that too. I don't think so. Kim, where's the verb that goes with painters?
Using.
Put a check above that too. Jerry, where's the verb that goes with painters?
I was going to say make.
And you're right. So a line under painters, 2 lines under make. Jerry, what kind of a clause would you say this is?
Main clause?
And what kind of a sentence would it be?
It'd have to be a simple sentence.
It would have to be a simple sentence. Any idea, Scott, why weavers is not the subject?
Because it's part of a prepositional phrase,
What is the prepositional phrase?
unlike the noisy weavers.
Right. We're going to find when we go to prepositions, and we're going to do that next, that like is a preposition, but can't you by extrapolation think that if like is going to be a preposition, then unlike, which just means the verb, the reverse of that is going to be one too. I wonder, a very simple answer, why paint isn't the subject. Any idea on that, Scott?
Paint?
In the
Oh
bottom
yeah,
line.
paint is a half verb because it's part of to paint.
To paint. If I tell you I to paint a picture, that's not going to stand on its own. It's a half verb. It doesn't drive that clause. And I'll answer this one because I want a real simple answer at this point. Right here. Using canvas boards or porcelain tiles. Here's another half verb. You can tell with that ing ending. If I say I speaking to you, that isn't going to be a complete verb. So this is a verb phrase. Actually, this is part of a verb phrase. And the clause, stripping it away of all those other phrases, reads, painters make almost no sound at all. That's really what this sentence is standing on. That's the main clause that drives this particular sentence. Anybody with a question? And there are lots of words to sort through. I agree with you. And we're going through this and building a repository of tools one at a time. On page 18, the simple sentence can have just one subject and more than one verb. So now we're looking at this. Paintings by prominent artists are sold in shops, at inns, and in the marketplace, and are often traded for wine or bread from a local merchant. I suspect the latter was most often the case. It certainly was for Vermeer. Maritza, where's the subject? You're working harder at that than I want you to work. Justin, where's the subject?
Artist?
No, I'm going to let that one go. You're doing just exactly what I want you to do. I'm going to tell you why I honor that mistake. Jerry?
Paintings?
It's going to be paintings. And I wonder where the verb is that goes with it.
Are sold?
Are sold. Is there another verb?
And traded for or often traded?
You tell me.
Often traded.
Well, the first thing I want to do is try often. And I'm going to try it with you verbally on that verb check. If I say to you, don't even get off that point, I often, you often, he often, we often, they often. Does it sound like a verb to you?
No.
Your dictionary's right at your elbow. Look it up and tell us what part of speech it is. Often. And I'm telling you people, I want you to live with a dictionary at your elbow, under your pillow. You never know.
It's an adverb.
Okay. Words will start to haunt you. I'll give you an example of that in a minute. But I want that other verb first.
Traded for. Just
Well, I guess we're going to try this one next. I for, you for, he for, we for, they for. What do you think?
nope.
So the dictionary would be the second thing. I'm going to save you a little bit of time on this. Yvonne, for wine or bread would really be what?
And prepositional phrases.
It would be a prepositional phrase. So third time's the charm. We're still in baseball season. The World Series has not been played. Where is that second verb?
Traded.
That's 50%. If you gave me one word and I said it's 50%, I must be thinking of another verb. Word.
Are.
Are. That being the case, what kind of a clause do we have?
Main.
And what kind of a sentence do we have?
Simple.
Exactly. And what does this sentence look like? It looks like this. You have one subject here, and you have two verbs. You all see that? Is that a question, Scott?
Yeah, actually, I was just trying to think of the people at home. Sometimes when you read these longer sentences and you're trying to say, well, how can you see like, for like the first example, when you have unlike the noisy weavers at their looms.
Or by prominent artists, which we just
Yeah.
tripped over again.
How other than by just sound can you tell if it's a full verb or a half verb or something like
You
that?
can't. And that's my point. And that's why I'm welcoming these stumbles, because it's going to make you absolutely terribly anxious to learn everything there is to know about prepositions and prepositional phrases, and then a short time after about half verbs and verb phrases, because there's no way to sound it out. Sound hasn't worked for 18 years. So now we have to go by rules. And the only problem with that is Rome wasn't built in a day, and so we have to lay a foundation. And we're laying it with lots of gaps and broken pieces. That's why I told you, especially for people at home, if you're having trouble following this, just have the trouble and realize that in about 3-4 weeks, you're going to be a grammarian expert wired for sound. People will be able to stop you on the sidewalk and ask you about a preposition or whatever, and you'll be able to give them the answer. Today, I want the stumbles, but that's the answer. You have to have that foundation. Let's try the next one. The simple sentence may have more than one subject and just one verb. Speaking of a long sentence, here comes an even longer one. To sell their wares in Delft, master painters like Johannes Vermeer, embroiderers, and makers of porcelain tiles must serve an apprenticeship in their chosen field for 6 years before joining the Guild of St. Luke. They can't sell anything for money until they've done that 6-year apprenticeship, and then sometimes they don't sell their work for money. So this is a long, arduous process. Janice, do you see anything that looks like a subject in there?
Master painters.
Painters would be one. How about another one?
Johannes Vermeer.
No. And let's get a check above that. We'll come back to it. What do you see, Vince? Where's another subject? Exactly. Embroiderers. I'm going to come back to that for a different reason, but you're right. Where's another subject, Pippa?
Makers?
And just makers. Now, what about a verb, Maritza?
Must serve.
Must serve. And I wonder what kind of a clause this is.
It's a main clause.
What kind of a sentence is it?
A simple sentence.
Exactly. So this time you have one subject, two subjects, three subjects, just one verb that makes up that main clause. Like Johannes Vermeer, turns out to be a throwaway prepositional phrase. How do you know that? You don't. Until we go through the rules on prepositional phrases, and they're coming up just as soon as we get through going through variations of the simple sentence. Excuse me, I have a question. Vince, you stumbled over embroiderers, and anytime that happens, you make me worried. Get a book out. What does embroiderers mean? Got a dictionary? It's all right. Look it up. Spell it right. And the rest of us are going to do this. We're going to circle embroiderers. We're going to arrow it to the margin and make a definition. This, people, by the way, is the intelligent way to expand your vocabulary. While he's looking that up, you don't wait for a reading teacher to hand you 5 little 3x5 cards and say, Ben, I'm going to put a word on each one of these cards here. I'd like you to look them up tonight. Would you write a sentence for me tomorrow to illustrate that you know what they mean? I mean, that will do it. But the intelligent way to expand your vocabulary is when you're reading the newspaper, this textbook, anything else that happens to be in print, and you see a word and you know you don't know it. Don't do what one student in a reading class told me her instructor told her to do. This is what she was told. If you don't know the word, it must not be important. Keep going. No, that's not what you do. Yeah, that was one thing I heard. The other thing I heard, I like this one even better, is close your eyes. And when you open them, you're going to read better. That doesn't work either. There's only one way to go. You circle the word, you arrow it to the margin, and you look it up. I mean, go ahead and finish what you're reading and then go back and do some major lookup. What do you get, Vince? What are you seeing there? Good and loud.
Okay, to ornament with or do needlework.
That's it?
There's a second definition.
Give me the second definition.
To elaborate with exaggerated detail.
True, you can embroider in speech by using fancy words. But this is to decorate. Make a note. To decorate with needlework. Beautiful needlework in the time of Vermeer. Now we have an unfortunate distinction between fine artists and craftspeople. And the fine artists are the ones who sell their paintings for lots of money. And people who make tiles and who do embroidery, and for that matter, weavers, are kind of looked at as craftsmen. That distinction wasn't made in Vermeer's time. They all belonged to the Guild of St. Luke. They still didn't make much money, but they were all considered fine artists, as I would consider them today. On page 19, the simple sentence can have more than one subject and more than one verb. Again, a very long example. Let's see what we get. Renier Vermeer, his wife Digna, and their 2 children, Gertrude and Johannes, lived in the Flying Fox Inn and were supported by Renier's weaving of silk kaffa cloth and his role as an innkeeper and an art dealer for paintings made by local artists. Jeff, where's your subject?
Vermeer.
Renier Vermeer, that whole thing, that's the father. And then what?
Digna.
Digna, and then?
Gertrude.
I would have said no on Gertrude. What else would you have said?
Johannes.
And I would have said no there for the same reason. And I'm going to tell you why I said those 2 no's in a minute. There is another subject.
Children.
Children. And where would your verb be?
Lived.
Lived. And do you have a second verb? You see it, Jessica?
We're supported.
Good. We're supported. I agree with you. And what about the kind of clause? What kind of a clause are we looking at?
Main clause.
This would be a main clause. And what kind of a sentence would it be?
Simple subject.
It would be a simple sentence. And this one looks like this. We have Renier Vermeer, and we have Digna, and we have children, and then we have 2 verbs, lived and were supported. By the way, notice that the subject words all go together and the verb words all go together. This creates one main clause and one simple sentence. The thing about Gertrude and Johannes, they're renamers. How can you tell? See that comma? These are renamers, stand-ins, if you like, for children. Had the sentence been written this way, Renier Vermeer, his wife Digna, comma, Gertrude, comma, and Johannes, comma, their 2 children, then the 2 children would have been the renamer. But this time, children is the subject, and Gertrude and Johannes are the renamers. Yes, question, Jerry?
So if it's just a repeat, you don't consider the following, correct?
I wish I could tell you I understood that question.
Sorry.
If it's a renamer,
it's a renamer.
you don't consider it the subject.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly. Okay. And on these Dutch names, I'm going to give them my best effort. I tell you, one of the humbling things about traveling through Holland, which I did during the spring, is that no matter where you go to a museum, for example, everybody without exception, including the people on the train, speak 4 languages. Of course, they speak Dutch. They speak English. They speak fluent German. They speak fluent French. No accent. They go right into the language. Somebody's buying a ticket who's from France, well, they can just have a conversation. And we have troubles here just sorting ourselves through English. But when I went through Rembrandt's house, and I highly recommend it if you go to Amsterdam, the person who did the listening tape, when you go through his house and you look at his different things in his studio, gives you an apology. I may mispronounce some words that are in English, but I'm going to give them my best effort, and I'll make that same caveat for Dutch words. I'll give it my best shot, but some of them may not be absolutely accurate. I think I'm okay with Gertrude and Johannes. They get more difficult, as you'll see. On simple sentence variations, we've just talked about all 6. You can have a subject, I'm just reminding you, and a verb, or the subject can be implied, and you can have a verb. Or you can have more than one subject and more than one verb. Or you can have more than one subject and just one verb, or the opposite. Or you can have an inverted clause where the verb comes in front of the subject. I would say that these are about 90% of the time, and this one down here is about 10% of the time. But inversions do happen, and you do have to be able to recognize them when you see them. Now, we stumbled on this one a couple of times today. I ask you again to memorize this verb check. There's a discussion in your book on page 21 that tells you when you're wondering if a word can be possibly part of a verb, run it through that verb check. When you're doing it and I'm not talking to you, this is a 10-second effort. If you were looking at a sentence like the one in your book, she is asleep, probably you'd get she is the subject, probably you'd get is as the verb, but the temptation would be to call that verb is asleep. If you want to know if is a verb, run it through the verb check. I is here? No. Again, you do hear people speak that way. You is here? Definitely not. But he is here works, so you know you've got a verb. As I told you in the last lecture, it's part of the irregular verb to be. I am, you are, he is. Most verbs are not that irregular. If you had a verb like writes, I writes, no, you writes, no, but he writes is going to be more obvious. So you know that is checks out as a verb. And if you did take the second step I just took for you and looked it up in your dictionary, you'd find out that it was the third person singular form of the irregular verb to be. But what if in looking at that same sentence, she is asleep, you asked yourself, could asleep be a verb? Try it on the verb check. I asleep, you asleep, he asleep, we asleep, they asleep. If it doesn't check out in any of those spots, and it doesn't, you know before you go any further that asleep is not a verb. So your next step would be to look it up in the dictionary, and that's going to tell you that asleep can sometimes be an adjective or a noun modifier or an adverb, which is a verb modifier. All you have to do is make a little note above it, ADJ/, ADV/, and you know that this part of the sentence is not ever going to be a verb. Clear? And those are tools. Memorize that. I mean, we don't need to keep reinventing the wheel on that. On page 23, let's talk about how you punctuate items in a series, and we'll talk about a whole lot of kinds of items. There are 3 acceptable ways to join items in a series. I would highlight that. I would add it to a grammar review cassette tape. And I would add this as well. The coordinate connective and, which always links equals, can be used to separate related objects in a series. One of the biographers of Vermeer has taken some guesses about what Johannes Vermeer's life might have been like, because remember, there's only 3 documents that talk about it. So here's a sentence that addresses that. Like other Dutch boys, Johannes Vermeer might have left out a wooden shoe stuffed with hay and carrots on December 5th, the eve of St. Nicholas, in hopes of having it filled with sweets and marbles and perhaps a drum the following morning. Scott McDonough, where is your subject word?
Johannes Vermeer.
And what would you say about the verb?
I want to say might have left.
I would have said that. What kind of clause is it?
A main clause?
What kind of a sentence is it?
A simple sentence?
And why would you have hesitated on might have left?
I wasn't sure about might.
Oh yes, it's a helping verb. And sometimes it can be a whole verb. Would anybody be interested in seeing a baseball game this weekend? I might.
Right.
Probably I might want to, but I might. You could use that. Now, what I want you to do is to look at these objects. He left out a wooden shoe stuffed with hay and carrots on December 5th, Eve of St. Nicholas, in hopes of having it filled with sweets, circle the and marbles, and a drum. With sweets and marbles and a drum is all going to be part of a prepositional phrase. When we get to prepositional phrases, if you think you might want to ask, can a prepositional phrase have more than one object? That does. But those objects are connected, equal in value, objects in a series, simply with the word and. Let's try another example. On page 24, if the objects in the series are short, simple words or phrases, only commas, a comma indicates a pause, and a connecting word are needed to separate them. So let's look at this activity. A month later, on January 6th or 12th night, he most likely carried paper stars through the streets of Delft, knocked on doors, and received his share of small coins, cakes, and other special treats. Maritza, where's the subject?
He
How about your verb?
must carry.
Did you say most carried?
Oh, carry.
Carried. Okay. Is there another verb? Yvonne, do you see another verb? Where?
Knocked
Not.
and received.
And received. Yvonne, what kind of a clause is this?
Main clause,
What kind of a sentence is it?
simple sentence.
Right. And what we're looking at is the series of objects right here of small coins, circle the comma. This is the object before last, cakes, comma, and here's the last object, other special treats. Arrow it down to the note and highlight that note. You should have a comma before the last item in a series, and I'm talking about right there. I've seen grammar books that say you don't need the comma. I've seen grammar books that say you do. Excuse me, language is a living thing. It changes, especially according to the way that notable people use it. Harvard University uses that comma, so does the rest of the world. It should be of small coins, comma, cakes, comma, and other special treats. Another one on a series of objects. This is your third possibility, and this one is really rarely used. Although a series of related objects may also be spliced with only commas or pauses, this method is rarely used, and it's never used when it sounds awkward. Justin, look at this example with me on page 24. Vermeer's everyday activities would probably call for a supply of golf sticks for hitting stones, small pieces of wood to float in the canal, fishing rods to catch freshwater river fish with. Justin, what would you say the subject in all of that was?
Activities?
It would be activities. And what about the verb?
Would probably.
See that ly ending? Circle it and make a note. Verb modifier. All of you make this note. Adverb, really, but I'm using a simpler terminology. Anything that ends in ly is never going to be a verb. Usually, slowly, probably, quickly, it's never going to be a verb. And your tip-off is that ly ending. Try it again, Justin. Where's your verb?
Would.
Now that's 50%. Take your time and be accurate. Where's the other half?
Call.
Good. What kind of a clause do you have?
Main clause.
What kind of a sentence is it?
Simple sentence.
And let's see how the objects are handled. Vermeer's everyday activities would probably call for a supply of golf sticks for hitting stones, circle the comma. Small pieces of wood to float in the canal, circle the comma. Last object, fishing rods to catch freshwater river fish with. Now I got a question. Justin, that's a funny looking word, golf, K-O-L-F. I wonder what it means.
You look it up.
Before you look it up, don't even get there that fast. Circle it, arrow it to the margin. And where are you going to look it up?
The dictionary?
No, you will not find it.
Oh.
Go to the back of the book. I had a hard time finding it. And I have a glossary in the back of the book where I'm anticipating stumbles on your part. This one I definitely anticipated because when I looked at it, golf looked to me like, good educated guess, a variation of golf stick, right? Has nothing to do with golf. What is golf?
A Dutch ice game. Dutch play a game on ice using a small ball and clubs called kolf, not to be confused with ice hockey.
Right. So it's a stick. It's a stick that you use on ice, right? A stick used on ice, but not hockey, and definitely not golf. I don't think they play golf in Holland. I know they don't play it in Delft. There are canals everywhere. There would be golf balls all over and not much lawn. Now, on page 25, let's recap that same concept and apply those same rules to a series of subject words or phrases. And this time, the first rule applies again. The subject words can be separated by the coordinate connective and. So look at the example. Jessica, look at this example with me. Housing and food and drink and lessons in drawing and painting were provided for young artists, such as Vermeer, during the time of their apprenticeship to a master painter. What would you say the subject words are?
Housing,
That's one of them.
food,
Food,
drink,
drink,
lessons,
lessons. How about your verb? Where's it, Kim?
were provided.
What kind of a clause do you have?
A main,
What kind of a sentence is it?
simple sentence.
And notice that you have 4 subject words here, and the links are all with and no internal punctuation. And takes care of it. Yes, Pippa?
What's the difference between all those ands and the ands that you threw out as a prep phrase?
Probably because the other ands were part of a prep phrase. Do you remember what the sentence was about?
Yeah. It was, okay, it was on page 23, and it was in hopes of having it filled with sweets and marbles and perhaps a drum. And with sweets and marbles and perhaps a drum was thrown out as a prep phrase.
Oh, we only took it out. We didn't actually really throw that out. It's a prep phrase and is really linking objects in that series of objects. So it's
Okay.
much like linking subjects in the series of subjects in the sentence you just looked at.
Okay.
We didn't really throw it out. We just said that was all part of a prep phrase.
So because it's objects, obviously it takes it out of the subject category.
Right.
Okay.
In other words, if you said this, I ate an apple.
Okay.
What part of speech is I?
First person.
No. What part of speech would you say? If we have 3 things,
Subject.
subject. And what is ate?
Verb.
And what is apple?
Object.
Right. So you just have 3 parts that are distinct because you couldn't say the apple was the subject because the apple didn't eat me,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
I ate the apple. So those were just part of an object, part of the objects of a prepositional phrase. Anybody else with a question? Jerry?
Why isn't the fourth and included in our,
Are you talking about here?
on page 25, yes?
This one that we were just looking at. Well, this is kind of a Pippa question. In drawing and painting is going to turn out to be a prepositional phrase. And so and is going to be linking these 2 objects of equal value. These ands are linking subjects. This and is linking 2 objects in a prepositional phrase. And I was waiting for somebody to ask me, and you didn't. You glided right by it. But in this sentence, I think it was, there certainly was another sentence in there that we were looking at where we were looking at objects in a series, and I was waiting for somebody to tell me, don't we have verbs in a series? We do here. We were looking at this. We said that on 12th night he received his share in this prep phrase of coins, comma, cakes, comma, and treats. But we also have a series of verb words here. Carried paper stars through the streets of Delft, knocked on doors, comma, and received. There's 2 different series in that sentence. One is a series of verb words, and one is a series of object words. That can happen, can't it? Do you agree with me, Jerry? Oh, sure I will ask you because I expect you to know. Well, now, on page 25. The subject words, here's another way of doing subject words, can be separated by a combination of commas, pauses, and the coordinate connective and at the end. Now look at this one. The preparation of colors, the stretching of canvases for the master, and a willingness to be hardworking and obedient were the obligations placed upon the shoulders of young indentured artists. We're going to have some fun with this one. Scott, where's your subject?
Preparation,
And you have another subject.
stretching,
And you have another subject.
willingness,
Now you have a verb.
were.
And what kind of a clause do you have?
It's a main clause.
I wonder what kind of a sentence it is.
Simple.
All right, the first thing I want to look at, you're absolutely right, is that you've got preparation, comma, and this is going to be the subject before last, stretching, comma, and then this last subject, a willingness. Series of subject words, right? But here's an oddball word, indentured. I wonder what it means. Go to the back of the book, Scott. Go to the back of the book on that one. And that's what I mean, people. I want you to get in the habit of just not gliding by a word when you see it, even if there didn't happen to be time to look it up while we're going over lectures in class. Immediately, you draw a circle around it, arrow it to the margin, and when you finish that segment, it's something you go back to. What does indentured mean, Scott?
A person who signs and is bound by indentures to work for another for a specified time, especially in return for payment of travel expenses and maintenance.
So make that a shorter definition. A contract to do what?
Is bound to work for another for travel and expenses, or for travel expenses.
Really for everything else, for lessons, travel expenses,
yeah, all costs.
food, accommodation, to work for another. But you see, it's signed. You can't break that contract. So it's not just a contract, it's signed. It's a signed agreement. If I signed to be an apprentice to Rembrandt, wouldn't that be wonderful if I were living at the same time he was? I would move into his home. And I would be given lessons by the master. And I would be given jobs. I'd have to stretch his canvases. I'd have to learn how to mix his colors for him. And in return, he would give me food and lodging and everything that he taught me how to do that I had to do for him to prepare him for his work would be something I would then carry away with me, as well as how to paint, sketch, shade, draw. Pippa, question?
Can you go back to that sentence really quick? Why wouldn't it be were placed?
Because if this is a half verb, that's true. But to see if it's part of the main verb, it's got to piece together and make sense. That's a good question. But could you say this? I'm going to shorten it down. The preparation and a willingness to be hardworking and obedient were placed the obligations upon the shoulders. No way.
Okay.
So placed upon the shoulders is going to turn out to be a verb phrase that starts with a half verb, and this is really going to be the main verb. And I could really put a period there and shorten the sentence right at that point and throw everything else that follows.
Okay.
Okay? Although the subject words can be separated only by commas or pauses, this method is rarely used, never again when it sounds awkward. Here's a really difficult one. Let's look at this. Lessons in sketching and shading, instructions on how to copy plaster casts of eyes and noses and mouths and ears, emphasis on a need to be neat and to maintain a clean palette and clean brushes were put forth by the master painter. Yvonne, what do you say a subject is here?
Lessons,
Lessons is one.
instructions,
Instructions is another.
emphasis,
Emphasis is another. What would you say the verb was?
were put forth.
Well, I've got to try something there. I
Were
forth.
put, I'm sorry, were put.
You were put. Right. If I try running forth by that verb check, I'm going to lose real fast. I wonder what kind of a clause that is.
Main clause,
And what kind of a sentence is it?
simple sentence.
And when we look at this part, notice that you have one subject here, lessons in sketching and shading, and you have another subject here, instructions on how to copy plaster casts of eyes and noses and mouths and ears. And those commas alone separate each of those three subjects in that particular sentence. By the way, when you go through Rembrandt's house, it's amazing. I mean, he was considered really elite because he has a whole long room filled with replications of heads from the Greek Parthenon and just hands and feet, and that would be used to copy. A student would copy that. That would be one of the things you would learn as an art student, to copy it exactly. In fact, Picasso, you know, people find his drawings and paintings sometimes rather difficult and high-flown because he's a cubist painter, which requires a pretty high-flown aesthetic to understand. If you look at his early drawings, his father was an artist and he started out in Spain and he learned how to copy the feet of pigeons. They're absolutely photorealistic. You would swear he took a photograph. When he went off in his direction, it wasn't because he couldn't draw, it was because he chose a different road to make his own art form. Take a look at this. One more time on a series, the same rules also apply to a series of verb words or phrases, and the verb words or phrases can be separated by the coordinate connective and. So here's another example. In 1653, Johannes Vermeer became a master painter and paid 1/4, that's all he could afford, by the way, of the required 6 guilders to join the Guild of St. Luke, and was registered as member number 78 in the Guild's Master Book and earned the right to sign and sell his painting. Scott McDonald, where's your subject?
Johannes Vermeer.
And how about your verb?
The first one's became,
And then?
paid,
And then?
was registered,
And you have another one.
earned.
And what kind of a clause is that?
Main,
What kind of a sentence is it?
simple,
And you notice that the verbs became and paid and was registered and earned. No internal punctuation on those verbs because using the connective word and displaces your need for any commas. In fact, the commas would be wrong. Unless you're somebody, again, like, I think I probably have 3 or 4 favorite actors now, but one of them surely at the top of my list is William Hurt. And I think I've always liked him because he creates his own punctuation rules as he goes. Have you ever heard him? You know, he starts a sentence like, today is, in my feelings about the day, and he breaks it in all kinds of funny places that nobody else does. And I guess if you're an actor like William Hurt, you can do that, but if you're a writer like you, like me, you can't. You've got to do it right. You're an academic. Take a look at page 27. The verb words can also be separated by a combination of commas, which, remember, are pauses. The comma indicates a pause, and the coordinate connective and. So now you have this example. With a professional career spanning a period of 22 years, Vermeer worked alone without the aid of apprentices, created several single-figure compositions selling for less money, produced only 35 known paintings, and could not settle his debts. Because he didn't work with apprentices, he had nobody to help him. Instead of producing 50 paintings a year, he produced 2, and only 35 in a lifetime. Died very young, very young. Ben, do you see a subject in all of that?
Career? No, Vermeer, sorry.
So which is it going to be?
Vermeer.
Vermeer. And where is the verb going to be?
Worked,
How about another verb?
created,
How about another one?
produced,
How about another one?
could not settle.
Now, you know, here's one of those words again. If we run it, on this one we're going to check. If we run not through a verb check, I not, you not, he not, we not, they not. Doesn't seem to be a verb. Got a dictionary over there? Scott's got one right on the end of the corner. Look up not for me and see what part of speech. If it had been spelled K-N-O-T, you could have knotted 2 pieces of string together, you know what I mean? Because it's a different kind of knot. But when it's a knot meaning no, what part of speech is it?
an adverb.
Okay, so let's make a little ADV notation on that. And that is not a verb. So now you have Vermeer worked, comma, created several single-figure compositions, comma. Last thing he did, produced 35 known paintings, comma, and on that last join, could not settle his debts. By the way, this part, created several single-figure compositions. If you sold a painting and it had several people in the painting, you were fine. You got more money. But if you did a painting and it only had 1 person in the painting, then it wasn't worth as much as a battle scene that had 50. You know what I'm saying? So painters tried to paint paintings. Think of Rembrandt's Night Watch. We're actually going to look at that later in the quarter. He would have made a bundle because of all those different figures that he had to paint, as opposed to Vermeer, who painted 1 at a time. Last rule, The verb words or phrases on page 27 may also be separated only by commas or pauses, but this method is rarely used. So let's take a look at this example. In choosing to marry Katerina Bones, a devout Catholic, he became a Catholic instead of a Protestant, moved out of the Mechelen Inn owned by his widowed mother, was now part of the household on the old Langendijk run by his mother-in-law, Maria Thins. Pippa, do you see a subject in this?
He
How about a verb?
became,
And then there's going to be another verb.
moved,
And there's going to be still another verb.
was.
What kind of a clause are we looking at?
Main.
What kind of a sentence is it?
Simple.
And notice that in terms of the verbs, he became a Catholic, comma, moved out of the Mechelen Inn basically, comma, was now part of the household, and there are no connecting words at all. Just commas or pauses to separate one verb phrase from the next. Scott?
Why isn't the word owned a verb?
Owned. I've got to find it. I know the answer, but I wanted to find it. Owned by his widowed mother is going to turn out to be a verb phrase. That's a past participle, and that'll be not a complete verb. Sometimes it can be. I owned a house, but in this case, it's just a verb phrase. It is not part of the main verb structure. I want you to look at two more things. I want you to see a city of a layout of the city of Delft in the 1660s, so you can see how the streets looked at that particular time. It's just a very small village. You can walk from one end of it to another in very, very few minutes. And then if we look at the next photograph, you'll see the site of Maria Thin's house on the Ode, and Ode means old, Langendijk. And that's the name of the street. And that house is still there. Actually, I think the house is where that cathedral is. I'm wrong. That's where the house was. And I think that has been torn down and rebuilt as a cathedral, but that is the site of where it was. I'd like you to go to your laying out the textbook on page 37, and let's just go through some rules that we need to be guided by. A listening test is just designed to help you get better oral practice in good concentration and accurate hearing. And so I'm going to read a one-page article to you, and I want you to listen, but I don't want you to take notes. As I've told you before, I think listening, reading, writing, all those skills are interrelated, and if you're deficient in one, sometimes you're deficient at all, and students really have a good handle on the tune-out factor. You know what that is. You're looking at me. Again, I've mentioned this to you before, and you could be anywhere but in the studio. You could be shopping at the mall. You could be thinking about the movie you'd like to see over the weekend, and then when I tell you we're going to have a major test coming up before the next lecture, you're wondering what could that test possibly be on. So I just want you to practice listening. And at the completion of the reading, I'm going to ask you 10 questions about the material covered, and all you're going to have to do on the sheet for that test is to circle A, B, C, D, E, or F. I'm going to read each question only 2 times. Now this is part of the listening test. Don't circle it on the first time. Let it go by. It's going to come by again. And circle the correct response on the second time. Don't mark 2 answers, just mark 1. So your test on page 39 looks like this, and it has a place for you to put your name. I'd like you to do that, those of you in studio, because we'll turn those in at the end of the session. And put the name of the course, put the name of the date, and then when I read these to you, I would use a tracking card. I would use a piece of paper that will keep you online so that you know when you're on question 2 as opposed to question 1. And again, just relax and circle 1 answer at the end of the reading. Now we'll worry about scoring that test after the fact. Would you go to page 39 and just have a nice quiet attitude listening? And I'm going to read you something that should be pretty interesting and see if you can remember 10 multiple choice questions based on this reading. I called it Spielberg's Big Day. On May 31st, 2002, Long Beach State University held its annual graduation ceremony. But this year's graduates included a man who had taken 33 years to earn the right to put on his cap and gown and receive the traditional handshake from the college president, as well as his Bachelor of Arts diploma. This man had taken time out to earn 3 Oscars, some Emmys, Golden Globe and Lifetime Achievement Awards, and 5 honorary doctorates, the last of which he had received from Yale University just 4 days before he was to be given the Bachelor of Arts degree, which he had earned just like all the other graduates had earned theirs. This man's name, of course, was Steven Spielberg. During the fall semester of 2001, Spielberg wrote a term paper for his Natural Science 492 class at California State University at Long Beach, which fulfilled the last of his general education requirements. He was then declared eligible to receive his Bachelor of Arts degree with a major in film and video production. He turned in his term paper just like everyone else, said Professor Donald J. Resch. It was longer than most, well written, and there were no grammatical errors. On May 31st, 33 years after he had dropped out of college, Steven Spielberg wore a $40 cap and gown that his staff had rented from the campus bookstore. He sat with the other 500 graduates of the College of Arts, and when his name was called, he walked across the stage, like them, to receive his diploma. I wanted to accomplish this for many years as a thank you to my parents for giving me the opportunity for an education and a career, said Spielberg, and as a personal note for my own family and young people everywhere about the importance of achieving their college education goals. After Spielberg flipped his mortarboard tassel from right to left, the film school at Cal State Long Beach would never be the same. People have told me, oh, I didn't know Cal State Long Beach had a film program, said Sharon Blumenthal, the director of the Film and Electronic Arts Department, and now people in Paris and Tokyo are hearing about us, she said. We are already climbing, and this is going to put us on the map. This raises the credibility of our degree. The most frequently asked question at Long Beach State during that week was, did Spielberg really earn his degree? And the answer was yes. He wrote term papers. Yes, he had to take a few general education courses. No, he did not go back to the university to sit in the classroom and take notes. Instead, he completed all of the requirements through independent studies. And yes, he passed out of FEA 309, the Advanced Filmmaking class. He was given credit for Schindler's List, which not only earned him Academy Awards for Best Director and Best Film, but also satisfied his most important film school requirement. Said Sharon Blumenthal, I think that counts as an advanced 12-minute polished film. Okay, here we go. Double reading, one question at a time. Number 1, Steven Spielberg completed his Bachelor of Arts degree after dropping out of college for A, 30 years, B, 31 years, C, 32 years, D, 33 years, E, 34 years, F, no information. Steven Spielberg completed his Bachelor of Arts degree after dropping out of college for A, 30 years, B, 31 years, C, 32 years, D, 33 years, E, 34 years, F, no information. Number 2, he graduated from the film school at A, the University of Southern California, B, Long Beach State University, C, the American Film Institute, D, UCLA, E, Yale University, F, no information. He graduated from the film school at A, the University of Southern California, B, Long Beach State University, C, the American Film Institute, D, UCLA, E, Yale University, F, no information. Number 3, the rental cost for the cap and gown Spielberg wore was A, $30, B, $35, C, $40, D, $45, E, $50, F, no information. The rental cost for the cap and gown Spielberg wore was A, $30, B, $35, C, $40, D, $45, E, $50, F, no information. Number 4, in order to complete his general education requirements, Spielberg A, sat in a classroom and took notes. B, took correspondence courses. C, hired a private tutor. D, took independent studies. E, gave the film school a copy of Schindler's List. F, no information. In order to complete his general education requirements, Spielberg A. sat in a classroom and took notes. B. Took correspondence courses. C. Hired a private tutor. D. Took independent studies. E. Gave the film school a copy of Schindler's List. F. No information. Number 5. In addition to his Bachelor of Arts degree, Steven Spielberg now has A. 1 honorary doctorate degree, B. 2 honorary doctorate degrees, C. 3 honorary doctorate degrees, D. 4 honorary doctorate degrees, E. 5 honorary doctorate degrees, F. No information. In addition to his Bachelor of Arts degree, Steven Spielberg now has A. 1 honorary doctorate degree, B. 2 honorary doctorate degrees, C. 3 honorary doctorate degrees, D. 4 honorary doctorate degrees, E. 5 honorary doctorate degrees, F. No information. Number 6. Professor Donald Resch said Spielberg's term paper for natural science A was poorly written, B. should be submitted for publication, C. was free of grammatical errors, D. should have been proofread with greater care, E. did not satisfy the course requirement, F. No information. Professor Donald Resch said Spielberg's term paper for natural science A was poorly written, B. should be submitted for publication, C. was free of grammatical errors, D. should have been proofread with greater care, E. did not satisfy the course requirement, F. No information. Number 7. Steven Spielberg chose to complete his college degree A because he was asked to do so by both of his parents. B. He believed in the importance of achieving college education goals. C. It would look good on his academic resume. D. His friends teased him about being a college dropout. E. He wanted to hang it on the wall. F. No information. Steven Spielberg chose to complete his college degree A because he was asked to do so by both of his parents. B. He believed in the importance of achieving college education goals. C. It would look good on his academic resume. D. His friends teased him about being a college dropout. E. He wanted to hang it on the wall. F. No information. Number 8. In the near future, Steven Spielberg A. plans to start work on a master's degree. B. Plans to start his own film school. C. Will start a film program in Paris. D. Will direct a film school in Tokyo. E. Will give copies of his films to Long Beach State's Film School. F. No information. In the near future, Steven Spielberg A. plans to start work on a master's degree. B. Plans to start his own film school. C. Will start a film program in Paris. D. Will direct a film school in Tokyo. E. Will give copies of his films to Long Beach State's Film School. F. No information. Number 9. Steven Spielberg earned his degree in the field of A. Mass communications, B. Broadcast journalism, C. Theater arts, D. Radio and television, E. Film and video production, F. No information. Steven Spielberg earned his degree in the field of A. Mass communications, B. Broadcast journalism, C. Theater arts, D. Radio and television, E. Film and video production, F. No information. Number 10, Steven Spielberg went through the graduation ceremonies like any other student, A, to thank his parents for giving him the opportunity to have an education and a career, B, to give reporters and journalists something to write about, C, to gain media attention, D, to give the film school at Cal State Long Beach some much-needed publicity, E, to popularize his movies, F, no information. Steven Spielberg went through the graduation ceremonies like any other student, A, to thank his parents for giving him the opportunity to have an education and a career, B, to give reporters and journalists something to write about, C, to gain media attention, D, to give the film school at Cal State Long Beach some much-needed publicity, E, to popularize his movies, F, no information. So now, the next thing I want you to do is take the test out of your book and exchange it with a fellow student, if you would. And then we're going to mark it this way. To the left of each number, as you score somebody else's exam or your own if you're watching this at home, mark each correct answer with a C, mark each wrong answer with an X, and then after the fact, we'll count up the total number of answers that are correct. So here's what you should have had. C if it's right, X if it's wrong. Keep your eyes on the paper you're responsible, forget yours. Trust somebody to do that for you. Number one, Steven Spielberg completed his Bachelor of Arts degree after dropping out of college for D, 33 years. Number two, he graduated from the film school at B, Long Beach State University. Number three, the rental cost for the cap and gown Spielberg wore was C, $40. Number four, in order to complete his general education requirements, Spielberg D took independent studies. Number five, in addition to his Bachelor of Arts degree, Steven Spielberg now has E5 honorary doctorate degrees. Number six, Professor Donald Resch said Spielberg's term paper for natural science, C, was free of grammatical errors. Number seven, Steven Spielberg chose to complete his college degree B because he believed in the importance of achieving college education goals. Number eight, in the near future, Steven Spielberg, F, no information. Number nine, Steven Spielberg earned his degree in the field of E, film and video production. Number 10, Steven Spielberg went through the graduation ceremonies like any other student, A, to thank his parents for giving him the opportunity to have an education and a career. So would you please write the number right at the top where it says score, a +8, a +7, whatever you had, and that'll get turned in to me at the end of the lecture. And if you're watching it at home, then you will email your test scores to your instructor following the information using the email address that's given in your course syllabus. And just so you know, the grading scale for a 10-point quiz is going to be 9 and 10 is the A range, and 8 is a B, 7 is a C, 6 is a D, 5 or lower is an F. And I'm just trying to improve a skill. This is, after all, a writing class. I don't care whose paper you had. Did anybody grade a paper that had a 9 on it? How about a 10? How about 5 or lower? And if you did, it just means you need work on listening. It's real easy to tune out. And what that tells you on a 10-minute reading is, if you're having problems staying tuned in for 10 minutes, what happens to you at the end of a 50-minute lecture? Much less a 2-hour lecture, which is what we're doing right now. Okay, let's switch gears and go back to the Palette book and go back to page 29 and talk about another aspect of the simple sentence. This time, the part of it that refers to inverted clauses and questions. And I would like you to highlight this in your book, please. Again, this is something that needs to be memorized and something that you need to put onto a grammar cassette review tape. If you would highlight the words there or here used at the beginning of a clause will often invert the normal word order. So when a clause begins with there or here, you're going to locate the verb first and then look for the subject. Go back to that first line that you highlighted, this one right here. The words there or here used at the beginning of a clause will often invert the normal word order. Take your pen and draw a box around the word often, because often means often, fair enough. What it doesn't mean is always. So let's look at this example on page 29. At the time of the artist's death in 1675, there were 11 children living in the Vermeer household with no money to pay for their bread. Imagine that. Now, I don't see a subject. Janice, do you see a verb?
Death.
What did you say, death? Let that one go. And be a lot louder. Vince, do you see a verb?
Were.
Were, I'll take that. I want you to get 2 lines under were. I want you to put a V above it. I want you to box off the word there. I want you to highlight it. I want you to get a check mark above it. And the reason you're marking there in that way is because it's a watch out word. When you're looking at a clause and you're having trouble locating the subject, one of you just stumbled on the word death, possibly you have an inversion. If that's the case, if you can find the verb first, you can ask yourself a question based on the verb that should lead you to the subject. Jeff, if I said, who were there, it might lead me to a subject if the subject were people. If I said, what were there, it would lead me to the subject if the subject was an object or a thing. I'm going to use who. Who were there?
Artists.
Did you say artists?
Yeah.
No, I reject that. I'm going to try you, Jessica. Who were there?
I have no idea.
And this is not easy. Farah, who were there?
Children.
Children. Put a line under it, put an S over it. Farah, really loud, what kind of a clause are you looking at?
Main clause.
So I want to label this M-1 and I wonder what kind of a sentence it is.
Simple sentence.
It's a simple sentence. Let's go back to this. Of the artist's death, the whole thing is a throwaway prep phrase. Thing about prep phrases is if you use a piece of it, you got to use the whole thing. You can say this. I'm going to flip that around into normal word order to make my point. 11 children were living there, and I'll come back to that in a minute. I can't say of the artist's death were living there. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't make any sense. Jeff, we only picked up 50% of the verb. Where's the other half of the verb?
Living.
Yes. So all of you with your pen, would you arrow were over to living? Now, first of all, that's an inverted clause. The verb is coming in front of the subject. But when you have an inverted clause and when the verb consists of more than one word, every single time it's going to divide around the subject like that. Do remember that you can always flip an inverted clause around into normal word order. I would highlight children. I'd colorize it in some way, just so you can see that you've got part of the verb to the left and part of the verb to the right. And that will always be the case if you're analyzing a clause that has more than one word acting as a verb. Again, let me turn that around for you. 11 children were living there in the Vermeer household with no money to pay for their bread. Pippa, you said you were taking a math class. Vermeer was born in 1632. He died in 1675. How old was he?
43.
Exactly. And he had 11 children. He painted a total of 2 paintings a year. And he didn't sell them for money. I don't think he got any money for a painting during his lifetime. So look at the next sentence. The baker, Hendrik van Buiten, was owed 726 guilders for unpaid loaves of bread. This, of course, is at the time of Vermeer's death. Jerry, what would you say the subject was in this?
The baker.
And what about the verb?
I would say was owed.
I would too. What kind of a clause is that?
Main clause.
And what kind of a sentence is it?
Simple.
Right. See, when it's in regular word order now, this is getting to be very easy for you. You can spot it pretty clearly. But now here is another inverted example. We're talking about that baker now. Here was a man already in possession of one of Vermeer's paintings. I don't see anything, Maritza, that looks like a subject. Do you happen to see a verb? Now, if I can find was, 2 lines under it, a V above it, box off here, get a check above it, I can ask myself a question based on that verb to locate the subject. Who was here?
Amen.
So that is my subject. And what kind of a clause do I have?
A main clause.
What kind of a sentence?
Simple sentence.
Right. You know he got that painting in exchange for bread. If we flip that around, a man was here. Or a man was already in possession of one of Vermeer's paintings here. You can kind of move here around. But watch out for it when it starts a clause because you can trip over it and not see it. Regular word order, I think, is a piece of cake. It's going to be becoming a piece of cake for sure. He was now given 2 more of the master's paintings to add to his collection by Vermeer's widow, Katerina, to pay for the 8,000 loaves of white bread consumed by Vermeer's household during the last 3 years of the artist's life. Do you get the content of that? Vermeer hadn't been able to pay for the last 8,000 loaves of bread that were needed to feed his family and the 1 or 2 servants that he had living in his household. Scott McDonough, where's the subject?
E
How about the verb?
was given.
And what kind of a clause is that?
Main.
What kind of a sentence is it?
Simple.
Right. So many of you, when I asked you at the beginning of the quarter, told me you wanted to be an artist. I think your chances are a little bit better now than they might have been back then. But being an artist still means being on the low end of the payment stick. Yes, Scott?
This has nothing to do with English, but in regards to artists, didn't you said Vermeer had no autobiography or no biographies written about him, no books or anything?
Oh, books have been written about him, but nothing firsthand by him. There's no letter. There's no journal, there's no diary. Yes, books have been written by him, on him, by the score. And there's a really good one by Anthony Bailey. It's in your bibliography that has a lot to say. A lot of it's speculative, like that part that we looked at today where when he was a child, he probably went through the streets of Delft, with a wooden shoe and straw and a hay. But nobody knows, because the only 3 extant pieces of material on Vermeer are his birth certificate, his death certificate, and his marriage certificate, so everything else is conjecture. There was another problem too. The other problem was that during the time that Vermeer was a young man, and the exact date escapes me at the point, but it was about the time that he was going to join the Guild of St. Luke's, they kept all the gunpowder, I don't know why, the military personnel in a disused nunnery. And one day, 2 men went down to the nunnery, and they were officials representing the government, and they just wanted to bring out a sample of gunpowder to inspect for some reason. They blew up and demolished 1/4 of the entire town of Delft. And one of the painters, who might have been the master painter that Vermeer would have been apprenticed to, and we'll hear more about him later, Carl Fabritius, all of his paintings went up in flames. The city was devastated, and he was brought to a hospital and died an hour later, and Vermeer's lucky that wasn't his fate. Wow. So a total 1/4 of that town was destroyed by that, they call it the thunderclap, by that gunpowder explosion. Yes, Maritza?
So about his 11th child, how do we know that
Many of them died. We know that because they have grave markers or some kind of certification that says when they died, and we know where Vermeer was buried. But I think maybe he had 7 or 8. I don't know whether they ever had children. I don't know what happened. There's almost nothing known about this man. Amazing, because he's really an interesting artist. Now, on page 30, there and here do not always trigger an inversion. See, that's the thing. I had you box off the word often because they often trigger an inversion. And as a matter of fact, an inverted clause can come up, and often does, with absolutely no warning. But there and here aren't always the triggers. If you look on page 30, there are 2 sentences. Here you have the basic facts regarding Vermeer's life. And on that example, Kim, that first one, where would you say the subject was? How about the verb?
Have.
And what kind of a clause?
Main.
What kind of a sentence?
Simple.
And if we look at the next one, there in Delft, a man lived and died following his passion for creating art without having a spare guilder to his name. Elbelin, where's your subject?
Man.
And how about the verb? First one.
Lived.
And the second verb.
Died.
And the kind of clause.
Main.
And the kind of sentence.
Simple.
Exactly. Notice this sentence starts with here, no problem. This one starts with there. This is normal word order that we're looking at, and that can happen too. Yes, question, Ben?
Following be a verb.
Actually, following is going to be a half verb. See that ing ending?
Oh, yeah.
And remember, for it to work, well, let's see. You might be right on that. I might change my mind about that. There in Delft, a man lived and died. I'll take it. I'll take that. That's a half verb. It's directly attached to the main verb, good eye. Let's take it as part of the verb. Yes, good eye. Good. Now, we mentioned this earlier. Let's mention it again now. If you have an inverted clause, if, this is important, highlight it because you're going to trip over it. If the verb consists of more than one word, it's going to divide around the subject every time. Before we look at the example, I'm going back to what Scott asked a minute ago, and I'm thinking about something really interesting. Here in this tiny little town, there weren't very many people living in it, they had a major religious schism. that also was devastating to the people who lived there, and Vermeer was caught right in the middle. Because what happened is the country used to be Catholic, and there was a major battle with Philip of Spain, and the Protestant ruler, William of Orange, won out. Now you have a divided country and a divided town. Almost all of the inhabitants living at the time of Vermeer were Protestants. They believed in William of Orange. And here Vermeer decides to marry a Catholic. And I'm sure that mother-in-law, having him as a son-in-law with no money yet, and no prospects of earning any, and he's going to be living in her house and raising those 11 children that he's going to have in her house, said, "You're Catholic, you're not marrying my daughter." For whatever reasons, he did become Catholic, and now there's a major schism because he's in the minority side of that particular town because of the political battles that preceded it. Let's look at this. In the last few years, this is the interesting part about this man with these 3 certificates, there have been 4 intriguing books written by novelists feeling a need to step into Vermeer's world to flesh out the inner lives of the powerful figures trapped inside of those layers of paint. Scott, I don't see a subject. Do you happen to see a verb?
Have been.
And what would you, let's stop right there, don't even go past it, put a V above it, box off there, get a check above it. What have been? I'm looking for the subject.
Books.
And put an S above that. I wonder what kind of a clause this is.
This is the main clause.
I wonder what kind of a sentence it is.
Simple.
And we can flip it around, but it is inverted. Now, do we have the whole verb, Elbelin? I see a V above have been, and I agree with Scott. This is the subject, books. But did we pick up the whole verb? I happen to think we picked up about 67% of it. Where's the rest of the verb?
Need.
No. What do you think, Kim?
Is it figures?
Are we playing 20 questions? Nope. Scott, where's the part of the verb you didn't tell me about?
Written.
Written. So, however it is in your book, would you arrow this over? And I want you to see what you've got here. You have an inverted clause. The subject is here. And half of the verb is on one side and half of the verb is on the other. Watch what happens when we put it in normal word order. Right now it's split. If we put that clause in normal word order, it's going to read this way. Much easier to see. In the last few years, 4 intriguing books have been written by novelists feeling a need to step into Vermeer's world to flesh out the inner lives of the powerful figures trapped inside of those layers of paint there. Vince, where's my subject?
4 intriguing books.
Books, and just books. You don't need the modifiers. Where's your verb?
Have been written.
That's right. See how the verb parts line up when you turn it back into normal word order? Vince, what kind of a clause is this?
A main clause.
And what kind of a sentence is it?
Simple.
Exactly. So these novelists then are looking at these paintings that people don't know anything about, and they're coming up with a story that could have been true. People, when you analyze a question, some reminders on page 33. I would highlight this. These are things you need to know. These are things that should be put on your cassette grammar review tape. Highlight this. Questions are often inverted clauses. Definitely know this. We just saw it happen. If the verb consists of more than one word, it's going to divide around the subject. I want you to continue to highlight on page 33. Know this process. Analyzing a question is a 2-step process. First, you turn the question into a statement, but when you do that, you don't add, you don't subtract, you don't change the words. You just get to rearrange them. Once you get them rearranged, you look for the subject and verb words because those words are now going to be in normal word order. So when we take a look at this, are you ready to join hands with those authors and to step into their Vermeer-inspired worlds behind those layers of paint? Pippa, when you turn that into a statement, it reads how?
You are ready to join hands with those authors and step into their Vermeer-inspired worlds behind those layers of paint.
Okay, when we get the statement, which reads as you said it does, where's your subject?
You.
How about your verb?
Are
Okay, you want to say ready? Well, let's put a question mark above that. You might be right. We'll come back to that in a minute. What kind of a clause do you have?
main,
What kind of a sentence is it?
simple.
Go ahead and get out the dictionary. I think we have one back there somewhere. And let's look up the word ready. This one could offer us a surprise. I'm inclined to say we don't need it as part of the verb, but let's just check it out. Can ready be a verb?
It's an adjective, it's a
It can be a verb.
noun, and it can be
Maritza says it can be
In here say it can be,
a verb.
but yes, but
And
I
it
ha-
can be. You are readied, being to make ready to take these exams. So I will go ahead and buy ready because it can be a verb, and that's a minor fix. Then arrow it back, people, to your question. Go back to your question and get a line under you, get 2 under R, get 2 under ready. We're still not done with this. Arrow it over. Your subject is right here in the middle. You're starting with a verb. You've got a main clause. You've got a simple sentence. But my question, Pippa, if we go back to the statement, is did you pick up the complete verb? Because if we pick up ready, I don't think so. Maritza, what do you say is the complete verb?
I have are ready to join.
And then if we took that, we would have to take, not hands, we'd also have to pick up this, ready to join, ready to step.
There.
And when you look at it in the question format, it's going to be the same, ready to join, ready to step. And that gives us a main clause. It gives us a simple sentence. Yes, Scott?
You said we weren't supposed to add words to the, when we put it back into normal word order. But if you go to the example, it says you are now ready, but now is not part of this question.
Should be. Where should we put it?
I don't know. It should say, now are you ready to join hands?
No, if we put it in here, you are now ready to join hands. Are you ready to join hands with those authors? I think the best thing is just to take now out of the picture.
Okay.
And the other choice would be, are you ready to join hands with those authors and to step into their Vermeer-inspired worlds behind those layers of paint? No.
Okay.
Either way.
Okay.
So we should have it in both. You're absolutely right, because when you change it into a statement, good eye, you don't add, you don't subtract, you certainly don't change. Okay? On page 34, this is a reminder. We've seen this before today. If your verb consists of more than one word, it's going to divide around the subject when the sentence is written as a question. But, and it's an important but, not all questions are turned into a statement, because sometimes a question word can act as a subject. We haven't seen that happen, but there is that possibility. So on page 34, look at these two examples. What will be found inside of those books? Elbelin, when you look at that first one, where's your subject?
What?
It's going to be what? Where's your verb?
Will?
30%.
Found?
67. You've got this, you've got this. Where's the missing part of the verb?
Be?
Be. What kind of a clause?
Mean?
What kind of a sentence?
Simple?
Now, there's nothing to turn around. There's nothing you can turn around there. That is normal word order. The subject is coming in front of the verb, and what just turns out to be a question word acting as a subject. Jerry, when you look at who will be there, where's your subject? Who? How about your verb?
Will be there, I would say, but I'm
I
lost.
there, you there, we there, he there, they there. You got the dictionary right in front of you. Let's christen it. Look up there. We've been talking about the word to all along this morning, so let's get a formal part of speech on there. What do you get?
Where is it? There it is.
It's got to be there.
I don't know.
No pun intended.
Ha 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 ha.
So there turns out to be,
Well, we got therefore and there. Well, we got 3 of them in here. Adverb, a pronoun, and
oh, no. You said pronoun, and what else?
a noun.
I can't believe that it's a noun, but I'll go with pronoun in a minute. One thing you found out is it's not a verb, right?
Right.
Okay, so look at this again. We'll come back to that in a minute. Who will be there? Your verb is what? Your whole verb is what?
Well,
No,
be.
that will be. Okay. I think here you've got an adverb, but be careful. When it's a pronoun, it's going to be this. When it's a noun, it wouldn't even be noun here. This is just another form of the same word, but this is going to be a pronoun and a verb added together in a contraction. It's not going to be a noun. I can't imagine they're being used as a noun.
Actually, I have the same thing here in the
I'd
electronic,
love to see one of you come up with a sentence that uses there as a noun.
which is very strange because say there
Very
parentheses
strange.
now, and it is
Exactly.
for
Your
definition.
challenge between now and the next lecture is to create or find a sentence that uses THERE as a noun.
Me?
Any of you.
Oh,
If a noun is
You've got to remember this. You are all scholars in the making, and if one of you can solve that puzzle, I think that would be great. You're going to do it, Pippa?
No, but if a noun is a person, place, or thing, then can't you say, I'll meet you there, and there can be a
Yes,
noun?
and there is an adverb describing where. It tells you where you're going to meet that person.
Okay.
A verb modifier. I can't imagine THERE unless you say there, and it's some new brand of shoes that I haven't heard of. There sell for $50 a pair. I mean, it's going to be something really odd, but take it as a challenge and see if you can find a sentence. I don't think you will that uses there as a subject. I have some homework for you. But actually, before I get to the homework, I wanted to try the homework first, and then I'll try something else if we have some time for it. I want you to go to page 35. And this is nothing to write. This is reinforcing what we just got through saying a minute ago. This is what you do when you're trying to locate subjects and verbs in questions, and you want to analyze the question in terms of its structural qualities. And sometimes when you do that, by the way, the wording comes out sounding kind of strange, and you don't care, because all you're trying to do is make it easy to analyze where's my subject, where's my verb. So what you do is this. We've said it several times today. You read a question, and you turn it into a statement. But when you turn it into a statement, you don't get to add, you don't get to subtract, you don't get to change words. All you get to do is rearrange them. When you have them rearranged, you locate your subject and your verb. Arrow it back to the question and locate the same subject and verb parts in the question. And remember when you're doing that if you have a verb that consists of more than one word, it's going to divide around the subject every single time. When the sentence is written as a question, when you turn it into a statement, it's going to divide. That's why you turn it into a statement. And remember this too, not all questions are turned into a statement, because sometimes a question word can simply act as the subject of a clause. Look at these two sentences right here. What took place in the book called Girl with a Pearl Earring? If I asked you, Jeff, to tell me where the subject was, actually I'll take either part. Where's the subject or where's the verb?
Took place.
And I want to say took place because I'm going to say that means happened. And where would you say the subject was?
Book.
Book? I've got to throw that out. That's part of a throwaway prep phrase. It's the object of a phrase. Where's the subject? Farrah, where's the subject?
What?
Definitely what?
Okay.
And what kind of a clause is that?
Main clause.
What kind of a sentence is it?
Simple sentence.
And not inverted at all. We get the subject in front of the verb. Who was there to write about, Jerry? Question.
the girl in the.
No, it's not a real question.
Oh.
You see, my acting training comes into play. Must have done a good reading on that. Where's your subject or your verb?
The subject is who?
Sure. And the verb is?
Was there. Or I'm sorry, it was to write. To write.
Okay. I to write, you to write, he to write, we to write, They to write. You got the right part, but the problem here, I know, isn't it awful? Life is hard. This is a half verb. I to write you a note today is going to be a half verb, not a whole verb. Actually, there is a whole verb in that sentence. Don't give him a hand. Where is it?
About? No.
Do you know, we did that the other day.
yes.
It's not a subject or a verb. I about, you about, he about, but we're running out of words. We're going to nail it.
There was.
Yeah, there are only two to choose from, Yvonne. Don't you help?
Was.
Thank you. And what kind of a clause is that?
Must be a main.
What kind of a sentence do you suppose it is?
I guess it's a simple.
Right. So here's the subject, here's the verb. There's nothing to turn around because that is in normal word order. So here's what I want you to do. Go to the other book, if you would, laying out the text. And would you go to page 65? Page 65 and laying out the text. This is one of two homework assignments I definitely want you to do between now and our next lecture. And this one is going to give you practice in doing just the kind of thing we were doing a minute ago, locating subjects and verbs in questions. And what I want you to do is to write 4 questions on the lines provided. You have the space right in your book. And then, after the fact, I want you to rewrite each question as a statement by rearranging the given words. When you get your statement in normal word order, in the normal word order rewrite, I want you to put 1 line under each subject and 2 lines under each verb. And then go back to the original question and mark the same subject and verb words. Now, don't do your rewrite until you finished all your questions. Your format starting on page 67 looks like this. So you're going to write question number 1. How do I go about finding the winning lottery ticket? And then you write the next one. What movie would I like to go and see tonight? And just write your questions and forget about the rewrites. Get all of your 4 questions down. Then go back to question number 1 and do your rewrite. And track in your rewrite, where's my subject, where's my verb, track it back up to the question. And remember that when you go to the question, if your verb consisted of more than 1 word, it's going to divide around the subject. And a really good question is, how come, and I'm giving you a simplistic answer at the moment again, when you analyze a clause, the verb is 1 word long, and sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5. How could that be? Well, we'll find out very soon that half verbs, like to write, we just looked at to write a minute ago, is 2 words for starters. And you can have more than 1 half verb side by side. And by the time you add a helping verb to that, you've stretched out the number of words it takes to make a complete verb. Scott, were you asking a question?
No, I was just thinking about that there as a noun thing.
Oh yeah, you'll lose sleep on that one.
Like, if someone were to ask, were there any apples in that basket, and you said there were, wouldn't that be correct?
That's interesting. I don't know. I'm going to have to think about that, and I will come up with an answer on that. I agree, if you say there were, there's nothing else to look at.
There's no implied subject.
There's no implied subject. It would have to be there. Gosh, if we were giving out silver dollars, you'd win one for today. You're right. Yeah. Now, and ask the question again, Scott. Ask the question again. Were there any
apples in that basket?
And then the answer is there were. Good for you. You see? Pretty soon your students outgrow the teacher, and I like that. I really do. I enjoy that a whole lot. I want you to go back to the palette book for a minute. None of us will have to lose sleep over that one now. On page 37,
Thank you.
I want you, I myself might have lost a little bit of sleep. I won't do it now. I want you to go to page 37. And now this should be an interesting exercise because you're going to start reading about the content of Girl with a Pearl Earring by Tracy Chevalier. I have just taken 1 line of her very complicated narrative and used that for the examples that we're going to look at in these simple sentence exercises. So the directions say this. In each example, the subject of the main clause is a given. Okay? And so what you're going to do is put 2 lines under each verb. And then please write the verb, word, or words in the blank space to the right. When you write it out, you are reinforcing without any effort on your part, this is a verb. I'm looking at a verb, and I want that reinforcement. So here is the example, and we'll just look at the example. The novel, Girl with a Pearl Earring, written by Tracy Chevalier, is based on a series of imagined incidents. Imagined, right? laced with historical facts about a young lady named Griet, a town called Delft, and the master painter Johannes Vermeer. So we know the subject is novel, and this is an obvious answer, I know. Farah, where's the verb?
Is based.
Right, you have it marked in your book. So you would normally put 2 lines under is based. It's what kind of a clause?
Main clause.
Add that to it, M-1. And what kind of a sentence?
Simple sentence.
Mark SS, and then take the time, people, don't do a shortcut, and write down is based, because you're reinforcing is based as a verb. I'm looking at a verb, and that reinforcement comes almost painlessly. Don't leave any out. If there's one in particular that you get stuck on, I want you to do it for sure. Do it with a pencil. If you're in doubt, work with a pencil, because we're going to go through the answers on the air during the next lecture. I don't want you to leave any out, and I want you to work through all of those. And as a suggested reading kind of thing, you might get interested in starting to read the book. It's not an assignment, but it's a terribly interesting novel. I'm afraid if I suggest you start reading it, you won't put it down. And we're just isolating one train of this very interesting, very young author's thoughts. I want something else, people. On page 51, while you have laying out the text, you had it there for you. I want you to do this too, and maybe we'll sample it if we have some time. We talked today about the fact that there's 6 variations of the simple sentence. I remind you, they look like this. 1 subject, 1 verb, an implied subject, 1 verb, and so on. And what I'm suggesting that you do is go to page 51 and write 5 examples that fit each pattern. Give yourself a theme. What would I like to do this weekend? It can be any theme. That's one I'm throwing out for starters. And if you write 5 examples for each of those variations that a simple sentence can take, you're going to wind up with a total of 30 sentences. You can bring them to a tutor for correction. That tutor is Scott McDonough. He's sitting right here in the studio, and he's going to have hours that we'll all know about very soon. So you would take them to a tutor, whatever tutor you had to work with, if you want to check your answers. But that's supplemental work, and I'll spot check a few of them if you bring them to my attention on the next lecture. It's going to look like this. Page 53 says, okay, here's one possibility, 1 subject, 1 verb, and you're going to write 5 sentences that work that way, and then your next 5 are going to be with an implied subject and 1 verb. And finally, just to note that in our next session, that's where we're going to start. We're going to review the concept of how to analyze a question, and we will definitely go over the answers on how to locate verbs in a sentence. You see, the people who used to proofread telephone books, didn't they have a job? Real easy to put an extra word in there that we really don't need. Anybody have a burning question? Be sure to be on the class listserv. Be sure to check listserv memos, the course syllabus. Yes, Scott.
Just a comment. I know that you put a lot into each of your lectures, so my favorite tool in this class is my rewind button at home on my VCR, so I can rewatch.
Isn't that a gift?
Yeah.
Having a course on a videotape means you can play it, rewind it, play it, rewind it until you get anything absolutely straight. I agree. Well, thank you very much, everybody. You did a really good job. Give yourselves a hands today, and we'll start again on the next lecture. That wasn't bad timing for a lecture that